It was just after midnight on September 26, 1983, when the quiet hum inside the Soviet Early Warning Command Center suddenly felt heavier than usual. The night shift was supposed to be uneventful: cold coffee, routine checks, the dull glow of screens repeating the same patterns they always did. But beneath that familiar silence, the world stood unknowingly at the edge of destruction. Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov had taken his seat only a short time before. He wasn't a hero. Not a politician. Not a decorated legend. Just a tired officer, filling in on a night few expected to matter. Outside, the countryside was calm and dark. Inside, the air smelled of metal, dust, and tension that no one dared to acknowledge out loud. And then it happened. A violent red flash filled the room. A deafening alarm tore its way through the command center, rattling the walls and freezing every man in place. On the central screen, a single line appeared in bright, merciless letters. Launch detected. United States ICBM. For a moment, no one breathed. Protocol was simple: verify, confirm, respond. A launch meant retaliation. Retaliation meant full-scale nuclear war. There was no time to debate, no time to hesitate. The system was designed to move faster than fear. Petrov stared at the screen. The computer claimed the missile was real. Other screens lit up, sirens blared, red lights pulsed across the ceiling like a heartbeat in panic. Officers rushed to their stations, shouting updates, checking systems, grabbing phones that rang with orders from above. But something felt wrong. One missile. Just one. A real first strike would not be a single spark, it would be a firestorm. Petrov's mind raced. The computer insisted the attack was genuine. The satellite imagery confirmed the flash. The system repeated the warning again, louder, as if trying to force him into obedience. He was the highest-ranking officer in the room. The decision was his. If he reported the attack as confirmed, the Soviet Union would launch a retaliatory strike, hundreds of missiles, thousands of warheads. The United States would respond. Within minutes, the world would vanish in a storm of fire. Every second felt like a lifetime. Every heartbeat felt like a countdown. He wiped sweat from his palms and leaned closer to the screen. Something inside him, instinct, logic, doubt, humanity, told him not to trust the machines. He had no solid evidence. No visual confirmation. Just a flashing warning and a choice that could end millions of lives. And then the sirens screamed again. Second missile detected. The room fell silent. Petrov looked at the red lights above him, then at the officers staring back at him with fear in their eyes. And he made a decision. A decision that broke protocol. A decision that could cost him his career. A decision that could save the world. "I report, false alarm," he said quietly. No one understood the magnitude of those words. Not yet. But in that moment, a moment of silence inside a small room hidden in the Soviet countryside, humanity stepped back from the edge of annihilation. This was the night the world almost ended. And the night one man stopped it. The alarm that had shaken the room only minutes ago suddenly grew louder, harsher, almost angry. The red screens pulsed again, and then a new message appeared, cutting through the chaos like a blade. Third missile detected. Someone in the back whispered a curse. Another officer dropped his pen. For a moment, it felt like even the machines were screaming. Petrov's heartbeat pounded in his ears, but his face remained still, a mask of forced calm. He stepped closer to the console, his shadow cutting across the glowing monitors. Behind him, the other officers stared in disbelief. 3 missiles. No one launches 3. The Soviet doctrine was clear: if the US attacked, it would be overwhelming. Thousands of warheads, dozens of submarines, all firing within minutes. Not 3. Not 5. Not a handful. But machines didn't know logic. Machines didn't understand fear. Machines only saw data, and the data said, attack. Sir, we must confirm, one officer shouted, voice trembling. Another grabbed the phone connecting the bunker to the higher command, waiting for Petrov's order. But Petrov didn't answer. He was staring at a detail everyone else had missed. Ground radar, the ultimate verification, showed nothing. No dots. No trails. No incoming fire. Only the satellites claimed the missiles were real. Petrov knew the system was new. Unproven. Too confident in its own perfection. What if the warning was a glitch? A reflection? A cosmic mistake? Fourth missile detected. The machine's voice felt almost mocking now, as if pushing him toward panic. Men in the room exchanged looks. Some looked ready to run. Others ready to cry. Everyone felt the weight of a decision that none of them wanted to make. Petrov finally spoke. Hold positions. No confirmation. We wait. The room froze. Wait. Wait while 4 U.S. nuclear warheads were supposedly minutes from impact. Sir, procedure demands. I know what it demands, Petrov interrupted quietly. But I won't destroy the world because a computer got nervous. His voice wasn't loud. Didn't need to be. Every man heard the conviction in it. A minute passed. Then 2. Every second stretched like a rope pulled to breaking. Men counted breaths, held their stomachs, clenched fists. And then. 5th missile detected. 5. 5 flashes on the satellite feed. 5 warnings. 5 chances to push humanity off a cliff. Petrov exhaled slowly, deeply. And once again, he said the words that defied protocol, logic, and the very design of the room around him. False. Alarm. The officers looked at him with a mix of terror and awe. Because if he was wrong, they had just doomed their nation. If he was right, he had just saved the entire planet. Outside the bunker, the night remained silent. Stars still shone over quiet forests. People slept in their beds, unaware that their lives depended on the judgment of a single man staring at a screen in a dark room underground. And slowly, one by one, the alarms went quiet. The world had not ended. Because one man dared to say, no, when everything else screamed, yes. The silence after the alarms faded was not peaceful. It was the kind that squeezes the lungs and makes every breath feel stolen. Men in the command center exchanged glances, some filled with relief, others with disbelief, and a few with quiet terror. Because now the question no one wanted to ask hovered in the air. What if Petrov was wrong? Petrov stood motionless, staring at the now still monitors. He didn't feel relief. Not yet. He felt the crushing weight of responsibility, the kind no human should ever have to carry. He had gone against the system. Against protocol. Against every expectation placed upon him. But something inside him whispered the same words again and again. 5 missiles is not an attack. It's a glitch. He replayed the satellite data in his mind. No heat signatures from radar. No ground confirmation. No submarine activity. Just the satellites, brand new, untested, and relying on algorithms that hadn't seen a real crisis yet. Behind him, Lieutenant Sokolov stepped closer, his voice low and shaking. Sir, what if this is the first wave? What if more are coming? Petrov didn't turn around. If more were coming, he said, they would be here already. A bold statement. A terrifying one. In the back of the room, Colonel Yudin slammed a fist against the console. You don't know that. If the Americans launched a precision strike. Petrov finally turned, his eyes sharp enough to cut steel. If the Americans wanted to destroy us, he said quietly, they would not send 5 missiles. They would send 500. The room fell silent again. Even Yudin had no argument. Petrov walked to the observation map on the wall, a massive, glowing representation of the Soviet Union and the rest of the world. Lines, grids, blinking dots, the fragile illusion of control. His hand hovered over Europe, then the United States. They don't benefit from this, he murmured. No one wins a nuclear war. For a moment, it felt like the entire room exhaled with him. But then, another officer approached him cautiously, as if approaching a man standing on the edge of a cliff. "Sir, the higher command is asking for an update." Petrov closed his eyes. He knew what this meant. He had to report his decision. He had to take full responsibility. If he was wrong, even by 1%, his career, his reputation, his future, all gone. If he was right, no one would ever truly understand what he had prevented tonight. He picked up the phone. Every man watched him. Every heartbeat in the bunker seemed to sync with his. "This is Lieutenant Colonel Petrov," he said, steady and controlled. "No confirmed attack." "Repeat, no confirmed attack." False alarm. Static crackled on the line. Then. "Copy that." A cold, bureaucratic acknowledgement. No emotion. No praise. Just procedure. Petrov hung up slowly, his hand trembling for the first time that night. Not from fear. But from the overwhelming realization of what he had just done. Humanity had been at the edge of oblivion. And one man pulled it back. But the night wasn't over. Because soon, scientists would analyze the data. Generals would demand answers. And Petrov would learn the terrifying truth. The satellites had misread sunlight reflecting off high-altitude clouds as missile launches. A cosmic coincidence. A deadly illusion. And the entire planet had come within minutes of annihilation. Even with the alarms silenced, the command center felt as if it were holding its breath. The air was thick, too thick, with fear, adrenaline, and something darker. Doubt. Not the kind you shake off. But the kind that crawls under your skin and whispers. What if you made the wrong call? Petrov felt that whisper now. He stood by the main console, his face illuminated by the pale glow of the screens. Behind him, officers moved cautiously, as if afraid any sudden sound might trigger the machines again. Lieutenant Sokolov approached with a clipboard clutched so tightly his knuckles were white. "Sir, the analysts are asking for a full report." He hesitated. "They want your reasoning." Of course they did. How do you explain something that is more instinct than calculation? How do you justify saving the world when everyone expects you to follow a script? Petrov gave a short nod and walked toward the briefing table. On it lay the satellite data printouts, lines of numbers, timestamps, and diagrams. Cold. Mechanical. Emotionless. Exactly unlike the situation they had faced. He looked over the pages, his mind replaying the moment the first missile appeared. His gut reaction had been immediate: this is wrong. But instincts don't count in official reports. Behind him, Colonel Yudin spoke sharply. "The system shows 5 confirmed launches. That's hard data. How could you ignore it?" Petrov didn't turn. "Because the system doesn't know how people think," he replied. "It doesn't understand strategy. It doesn't understand fear. It only follows code." Yudin scoffed. "And you trust your feelings over satellites?" Petrov finally turned, his eyes fierce. "I trust logic. And logic says the Americans wouldn't start a nuclear war with 5 missiles." He held up the printout. "If you want to believe this over common sense, be my guest." Yudin stepped back, swallowing his anger. The room went quiet again. For a moment, all they heard was the soft humming of machines, machinery capable of erasing cities, deciding fates, and misinterpreting sunlight as a threat. Petrov stared at the data once more. 5 launches, all detected within minutes. All on the same trajectory. All perfect. Too perfect. Almost artificial. He felt that whisper again, the dangerous one. What if this was a test? He pushed the thought away. Too paranoid. Too dramatic. But the truth was that no one knew. Not tonight. Suddenly, a door swung open and two communications officers rushed in. "Comrade Colonel," one of them said breathlessly. "We received confirmation from the Strategic Radar Command." Every head turned. Petrov felt his stomach tighten. The officer continued. "Ground radar confirms no missile launches. Nothing. Clear skies. No threats detected. Silence. Pure, perfect silence." Then a collective exhale rolled through the room. Some collapsed into chairs, some rubbed their faces, others simply stared ahead, stunned. Petrov closed his eyes. Not in relief, but in exhaustion. The danger had passed. Humanity was safe. But the night had changed him. Because for the first time, he realized. One malfunction. One misread signal. One solar reflection. One confused satellite. Could end the world. And most terrifying of all. No one outside this bunker would ever know. No one would understand how close they had come tonight. No one would ever look at the stars the same way again. Part 5. The calm that settled over the command center was fragile, so fragile that even a whisper felt like it could shatter it. Men sat slumped in their chairs, exhausted but alive. The world outside remained peaceful, unaware that it had nearly slipped into oblivion. But inside the bunker, the night was far from over. Because now came the part everyone feared more than the alarms. The investigation. A pair of stern-faced officers from the higher command entered the room without a word. Their uniforms immaculate. Their steps sharp. Their eyes cold. They weren't here to congratulate anyone. They were here to find someone to blame. Petrov remained at his console, his posture straight but his muscles tense. The officer's presence made the air feel heavier, as if the walls themselves were leaning in to listen. "Lieutenant Colonel Petrov," one of them said, his voice clipped, emotionless. "You made the call to classify the launch warnings as false. Is that correct?" "Yes," Petrov answered calmly. "Against protocol?" "Yes." The officer paused, studying him with the eyes of a man used to judging others. "Explain." Petrov took a breath. This was the moment. Not of fear, but of clarity. All 5 signals came from the same satellite system, he began. No ground radar confirmed any launches. No additional activity was detected across our borders. And an attack with only 5 missiles is strategically unreasonable. The officer raised an eyebrow. "And you expect us to rely on your intuition?" Petrov met his gaze without flinching. "I expect you to rely on logic." The room fell silent again. Logic. That was what had saved them. Logic, and a man brave enough to trust it over a machine. The second officer leaned closer, his voice colder. "Do you understand the consequences if you had been wrong?" Petrov's reply was almost a whisper, but steady. "If I had been wrong, none of us would be standing here." The officers exchanged a quick look, one of those silent conversations military men have when the truth is too sharp to hold comfortably. Then came the technical team, engineers, analysts, radar specialists, rushing to the consoles, digging through data. Numbers flew across screens. Graphs updated. Codes were dissected. And slowly, a picture emerged. The satellites had misinterpreted the reflection of the sun on high-altitude clouds, mistaking light for rocket plumes. It was almost absurd. Cosmic coincidence disguised as an apocalypse. One engineer whispered in disbelief. "Just sunlight. That's all it was." Another rubbed his forehead. This could have triggered a full-scale retaliation. Petrov looked at the ceiling, as if staring through the layers of concrete into the sky above. The stars had played a cruel joke tonight. But it was a joke that nearly killed the world. The officers turned back to Petrov. "You acted beyond your authority," one said. "That may require disciplinary action," the other added. Petrov didn't respond. Punishment didn't matter. Reputation didn't matter. What mattered was that people were alive. Millions of them. Billions. Families. Children. Entire nations. All because he didn't panic. All because he trusted his humanity more than a machine. One of the junior officers in the room, barely older than a boy, murmured softly. "You saved us." Petrov didn't smile. He didn't bow. He didn't respond at all. He simply looked at the dark monitor in front of him. The screen that had tried to convince him the world was ending. And he whispered only to himself. No machine should decide the fate of humanity. Morning never felt so far away. The night dragged on inside the bunker, stretching endlessly as officers worked through the data, arguing in low, tense voices, trying to understand how the world had been reduced to a coin toss by a trick of sunlight. Petrov stood off to the side now, no longer the center of chaos. But the silent center of gravity. He watched as the analysts circled diagrams and highlighted lines of code. Every new discovery pointed to the same horrifying truth. The system had failed. And only one man had stopped it from ending everything. But Petrov didn't feel like a savior. He felt tired. Not from lack of sleep, though exhaustion gnawed at his eyes. But from the unspoken knowledge that filled the room. No one would thank him. No one would celebrate him. And no one, absolutely no one, would let the world know what really happened tonight. This event was too dangerous. Too political. Too capable of exposing weaknesses that neither superpower wanted to admit. A secret this big could not be allowed to breathe. As he leaned against the cold steel railing, Lieutenant Sokolov approached quietly, almost timidly. "Sir, are you all right?" Petrov gave a faint, tired smile. "People are alive. That's enough." Sokolov hesitated, then asked the question burning in the minds of everyone present. "Were you afraid?" Petrov looked at him, a long, thoughtful look. "Yes," he finally said. "I was terrified. Anyone who wasn't, would be a machine." Sokolov nodded slowly. He had seen Petrov's face during the alarms, not panic, but a kind of fierce, determined clarity. Courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is choosing to act despite it. Across the room, Colonel Yudin argued with the investigation officers again, gesturing wildly at the data printouts. This man disobeyed protocol. Yudin barked. He made a decision that wasn't his to make. One of the investigators responded sharply. "And if he hadn't made it, you wouldn't be here to complain." Yudin fell silent. The truth hit him like a punch. Petrov turned away from the argument, uninterested. He didn't want glory or recognition. He didn't want to be right. He just wanted to sleep, for the alarms to fade from his memory, for the tension to release from his body. He walked toward the exit door of the bunker, the thick metal frame still humming faintly from electronics. On the way out, he passed the massive world map on the wall. Time zones. Borders. Oceans. Populations. 8 billion souls who would never know how close they came to vanishing in fire. He rested his hand on the map for a moment. A gesture no one noticed. A gesture that said everything he could never say aloud. The officer on duty at the door saluted him. "Lieutenant Colonel." Petrov nodded back. And then he stepped into the corridor. A long, dimly lit passage deep underground, the fluorescent lights flickering above him like tired stars. His footsteps echoed softly. Each step carrying the weight of a decision that had saved humanity. Each step moving him farther from the greatest crisis in human history. And deeper into the silence that would bury his story for decades. Because heroes in secret wars don't get medals. They get forgotten. The corridor outside the bunker felt colder than the command room itself. A long, sterile tunnel carved into the earth. A place built not for comfort, but for survival. Petrov walked slowly, each step echoing faintly off the concrete walls. The adrenaline had drained from his body, leaving behind only exhaustion and a hollow ache deep in his chest. He had just prevented the end of the world. And yet, he felt smaller than ever. A young operator jogged up behind him. "Sir." Petrov turned. "You're requested in the debriefing chamber." Of course he was. The higher command would not let him disappear so easily. Petrov nodded, forcing himself to walk back toward yet another steel door, this one marked with red letters. "Restricted access, level 5. 2 guards opened it. Inside, the room was stark, clinical. A long metal table, harsh white lights, and 3 officers seated like judges in a silent tribunal. Petrov stood before them. He didn't fidget. Didn't avert his gaze. Didn't apologize. He simply waited. Finally, the officer in the center spoke. "Lieutenant Colonel Petrov, this committee has reviewed the incident. Your decision to classify the launch warnings as false has been noted." A pause. Then another officer added. "And deemed correct." The words should have felt like victory. Validation. Relief. But Petrov felt nothing. He watched as the chairman folded his hands on the table. "What you did tonight prevented a possible retaliatory strike. You understand the significance of that?" "Yes," Petrov said quietly. "And you understand," the chairman continued, "that such information must not leave these walls. For reasons of national security." There it was. The truth buried before it could even breathe. Petrov nodded once. "We will finalize our report," the officer on the left said, "but the details of this event will be classified at the highest level." Meaning? No one will know. No one will remember. No one will ever hear his name. The chairman leaned slightly forward. "Your actions were commendable. But you also acted outside strict military procedure." Petrov felt the blow before the words landed. "Therefore, disciplinary notes will be added to your record." He blinked. Not in shock. But in recognition. He had expected this. Heroes rarely look like heroes in official documents. The chairman continued. "You may leave." Petrov turned and walked out without a word. As the door slammed behind him, the sound echoed down the hallway, heavy and metallic. Like the lid of a coffin sealing shut. He paused in the dim light, breathing slowly. The world above was waking up to a peaceful dawn. Children preparing for school. Workers heading to factories. Families brewing morning tea. Completely unaware that they existed only because of a decision made in silence. By a man who would be punished for it. Petrov leaned back against the cold wall and closed his eyes. No medals. No speeches. No headlines. Just the quiet knowledge that he had done the right thing. Sometimes, he thought, that had to be enough. But deep down, he wondered. What if the system failed again? What if next time, the man in the chair wouldn't hesitate? What if the world's luck had already run out once tonight? He opened his eyes and continued walking down the dim corridor. The footsteps of a hero no one would ever see. Morning finally arrived. But for Petrov, it didn't feel like morning at all. It felt like the same long night stretched into a new shape, quieter on the surface, but heavier underneath. When he stepped outside the underground facility, the first rays of sunlight hit his face. Warm. Soft. So painfully ordinary. The same sun whose reflection had almost triggered the end of humanity. He squinted at the sky, his mind replaying the alarms, the red flashing lights, the 5 phantom missiles that existed only in a machine's imagination. The world looked peaceful. Birds were chirping. A truck rumbled somewhere along a distant road. Officers chatted casually by the base entrance, drinking tea from metal cups. Nothing in the world hinted that billions of lives had hung on a thread only hours ago. Petrov walked past them quietly. No one saluted. No one congratulated him. To them, he was just another officer ending a night shift. As he reached the bus stop outside the base, an elderly woman stood beside him, clutching a bag of groceries. She looked at him and smiled politely. "Long night at work?" she asked. Petrov hesitated. How could he explain to her that her smile, her life, her very existence, continued only because he had refused to trust a machine? He simply nodded. Yes. A long night. The bus arrived, brakes hissing. They boarded. He took a seat by the window, watching the landscape slide past, forests, muddy roads, distant farmland. Ordinary things. Beautiful things. And for the first time since the alarms, he allowed himself to feel something close to emotion, not joy, not relief, but a quiet, fragile appreciation of the world as it was. Children playing by a fence. A farmer carrying water buckets. A young couple walking hand in hand. All of them alive. All of them unaware. He wondered if people were meant to know how close they'd come to annihilation. Would it make them appreciate their lives more? Or would it crush them with fear? Maybe ignorance was mercy. The bus slowed near a newspaper kiosk. Petrov glanced at the front page. Tensions rise in Cold War. Nuclear balance uncertain. He exhaled through his nose, not a laugh, not a sigh, something between the two. If only they knew. When Petrov finally reached his apartment building, a gray Soviet block with peeling paint and a flickering stairwell light, he felt drained. Not just physically. Drained in a way that touched the soul. He opened the door to his small apartment. The scent of old books. The faint ticking of the kitchen clock. Silence. On the table lay a photograph of his wife, who had passed away years before. He touched the frame lightly. "You would have told me I did the right thing," he whispered. His voice cracked just a little. He sat down, placing his hands on the table, staring blankly ahead. No medals. No recognition. Only paperwork, reprimands, and the haunting memory of the alarms. But he knew something no document could capture. The world had ended in that bunker. And he had brought it back. He closed his eyes. And for the first time since the alarms, he finally let himself breathe. Several days passed. Life at the base returned to its usual rhythm, officers exchanged dry greetings, equipment hummed, boots echoed in metallic corridors. But under that routine lay something colder, an unspoken tension. A sense that the truth was too heavy for anyone to carry alone. Petrov was summoned back to the command center. The message was short, formal. Lieutenant Colonel Stanislav Petrov. Report to Major General Chernov. 0900, urgent. He felt a knot tighten in his stomach. Chernov wasn't just a superior. He was the superior, a man whose decisions shaped the entire Soviet early warning system. When Petrov entered the room, Chernov was already standing behind his desk, hands clasped behind his back. A large classified dossier lay open. Chernov didn't sit. "Petrov," he said slowly, "we've reviewed your incident." The way he said "incident" sounded wrong, too small, too clinical. Like calling an earthquake a vibration. Chernov tapped the folder. "There are questions." Petrov remained still. Chernov opened the dossier fully. Inside were printed screenshots of the alarm system. Lines of red indicators. Missile launch detected. Impact in 12 minutes. Petrov's name signed under a single decision. Launch response, do not confirm. Chernov read aloud. You chose not to report the alert to the chain of command. Petrov nodded once. You made this choice, alone. Another nod. Chernov's eyes sharpened. Why? Petrov inhaled, not defensive, not afraid, but steady. Because the system was wrong, he replied. It was only 5 missiles. The Americans would never launch with 5. They would launch with 200. Chernov stared at him. Not blinking. Not moving. Then, unexpectedly, he snapped the folder shut. You understand, Chernov said quietly, that if you were wrong, we would not be standing here having this conversation. Yes, Petrov answered. That is why I had to be right. Chernov's expression twitched, neither approval nor anger, something more complicated. He walked around the desk, stopping right in front of Petrov. You disobeyed protocol, Chernov said. If you had followed it, we might have launched a counterstrike. Millions would be dead. Petrov held his gaze. Then the protocol is wrong. For a moment, the room was silent. A dangerous silence. Chernov exhaled, slow, heavy. You understand, he said, that I cannot reward you. Petrov swallowed but didn't lower his eyes. Yes. I understand. Chernov added quietly. And I cannot punish you either. Because history might have punished us all instead. He stepped away, as though the weight of those words was almost physical. Then he pointed at the dossier. This report, he said, will not leave this building. Not now. Not ever. No one is to know what truly happened. Petrov's brow tightened. Chernov continued. It's better for the country. Better for the military. Better for the world. Petrov realized the truth. They would bury everything. His decision. The malfunction. The near apocalypse. All of it. He would return to duty as though nothing had happened. He would receive no medal, no recognition. Only silence, heavy, suffocating silence. As Petrov turned to leave, Chernov added one last sentence. A sentence that would stay with him forever. Petrov, you didn't save the world for glory. You saved it because you were human. Don't expect the world to understand that. Petrov paused at the door. I never expected it to, he said quietly. Then he walked out. Down the hall. Past the guards. Back into a world that didn't know it had been reborn. The dossier remained on Chernov's desk. He stared at it for a long time. Then, slowly, he placed it into the classified, never disclose, archive box. And closed the lid. Years passed. The Cold War burned on. Politicians changed. Missiles evolved. Borders shifted. But one thing stayed the same. The world never learned how close it came to ending that night. Stanislav Petrov continued to serve quietly. No interviews. No awards. No headlines. Just silence, the same silence he heard in the command bunker when the alarms were screaming. He retired with a modest pension. Lived in a small apartment. Bought groceries. Smoked cheap cigarettes. Fed stray cats outside his building. He was just another man in a vast country. But every September, as the autumn chill settled in, Petrov would sit by his window, alone with his thoughts, and replay the night the world balanced on the edge of extinction. Not in fear. Not in pride. But in reflection. On one such evening, a journalist knocked on his door, a young man, nervous, carrying a notebook. Are you Stanislav Petrov? Yes. They say you prevented a nuclear war. Petrov sighed. Sit. I'll tell you what happened. As he spoke, the journalist listened in stunned silence. And what did they reward you with? The journalist finally asked. Petrov shrugged. No medals. No parades. I did my job. They told me to forget it. The journalist's eyes widened. But you saved the world. Petrov shook his head. No, he said softly. I only refused to destroy it. The journalist paused. What did that night feel like? Petrov looked out the window. Dark, he whispered. But quiet. Too quiet. Like the whole world was holding its breath. The story finally escaped the walls of secrecy. Slowly, then quickly, the world began to learn about the unknown Soviet officer who chose logic over fear. And humanity over protocol. Documentaries were made. Awards from foreign peace organizations arrived in the mail. People wrote him letters from every continent thanking him for their lives, their families, their futures. But Petrov accepted them the same way he accepted the silence that followed his decision. With humility. I don't want to be a hero, he said. I just want people to think more. About what they build. And what they destroy. In his final years, Petrov lived simply. Quietly. Peacefully. There was no dramatic music. No triumphant speeches. Just an old man who once faced the end of the world. And chose a different ending. When he died in 2017, there were no military funerals. No national tributes. Only a small note in a local paper. Stanislav Petrov has passed away. But somewhere, in every city, in every home, in every life that continued because of him. His decision echoed. One human choice can change the fate of the world. And he made that choice. When it mattered most.